This is a lecture on evaluating and controlling technology for CS 4020.
Topics included in this
So we're
lecture
going to
include
talk about the
information,
idea
knowledge,
of information
and
and
judgment
evaluating
of
it. We'll
technology,
talk about
computers and
specifically
community
the issue
issues,
of
what's called the
computers
digital
thinking for
divide,
us and computer modeling,
evaluation of the impact
the digital
of
divide,
computer
different
technology, and making
viewpoints on
decisions about
technology.
technology.
As part of that, we'll talk about what Neo-Ludditism or Neo-Luddite is. And finally, some final words on making decisions about technology.
So one thing that has
So
changed the whole
to start off, when we
idea
think
of
about
getting
evaluating
information
information
technology of the
or
web.
evaluating technology, we
The
often think
web is
about
a prevalent
evaluating
source of
the web and
information,
information
and
on
the
the web.
question that you should ask yourself
Um,
is this
so this is just
source
a
good?
little
Not everything
screenshot
on the
from
web
IBM.
is necessarily
It
that
talks
of
about the
expert
fact that
information. It
there's a
could be
lot of
individual
uncertainty
opinion, or it could be
uh,
some kind of
of
consensus
data,
information.
that there's a
And some of the information
lack
is
of
wrong,
trust, that
so
veracity is an
it's really
issue.
important to
And here
try
you
to
can see
understand the
27% of
source.
their
This is
respondents
not as
said
obvious
they thought the data was
as it might
actually
be in print.
inaccurate.
So you
So
have to
it is an issue even not just for society, but as you can see, businesses themselves are having an issue. Moving
So one
on,
thing that has changed the whole
there's a book here, Web
idea
of
of getting
Deceit, even talking
information
about
is
the
sort of the
information,
technology of the web.
misinformation, manipulation
The
of
web is a
information.
prevalent source of information,
So
and the
the
question
web is a
you should
prevalent
ask
source
yourself
of
is
information
this
today.
source
Some
good?
of the questions
Not
you really
everything
should
on
ask
the web
yourself, and these questions
is
were asked
necessarily
more
that of expert
in the
information. It
beginning,
could
let's
be
say 5
individual
years of the web,
opinion,
than
or
they
it could be
are
some
now,
kind of
which is a bit
consensus
sad
information.
because in some ways
And some of the
I think the
information is wrong,
problems are
so
greater
it's
now
really
than they were in
important
the
to
beginning
try
of
to
the web.
understand
So is
the
the
source.
information
This
good
is
that you
not as
found?
obvious
It's
as
not
it
as
might be
easy
in print.
necessarily to know that
So
compared to
you
print
have to
media. It's
question.
sometimes even hard to know where the data is coming from, who the author or source is. So the idea also that's changed a lot with the advent of the web is the idea of expert information versus an individual opinion versus the wisdom of the crowd. In the past, certainly people trusted their friends, prior the internet, prior computers, maybe even in some scenarios more than an expert, let's say a doctor. Although I think far less than happens today. And something that didn't really couldn't occur easily, is the idea of the wisdom of the crowd. Certainly you might have been part of a group or an organization that would give you that kind of feedback prior technology and computers and the web. But now that idea is so prevalent. Ratings on public websites, from everything from knowledge being provided by sites like Wikipedia, to even the creation of new technologies and funding of new technologies by the crowd. So this issue of the crowd and the wisdom of the crowd is totally different and very prevalent in today's technology and web related society. So certainly there's a lot of information on the web. Trying to find that information, going through search engines, Google being one of the most famous of them, is certainly an issue. So that kind of gives you another idea that, maybe how does that work when you have a few companies kind of controlling your entrance to information, like through search portals, how the ordering of that information influences what information you get. These are things that people don't talk about enough and don't really even understand the impact of what it is, because they don't even understand and can't understand, because it's proprietary how this information is being presented to them.
An example that's often
So
talked about
Wikipedia is
with regards to information on
a
the web is that
very
of Wikipedia.
popular website
Wikipedia
that
is
was
actually
developed
written by
early on
volunteers.
with the web,
Some
and it's
posts
basically
can
an
be
online
biased and not
encyclopedia.
accurate.
but
although
some very
anyone
key
can
fundamental
write, most
differences,
people don't
unlike
think
what you
to
might
use the
find
information.
in your library, or
And
you
it
could
does turn out that typically the
purchase
ones that
access
do
to, for
are either
example, with
educated or
the
experts in writing.
Britannica
This
set
is
of encyclopedias,
particularly, I think,
is that
true
this is written
in
by
more technical
volunteers,
fields,
and
fields that
you'll
have
find I have found
are
incorrect
prone to less
information. I tend to
opinion
use the
and more
Wikipedia more
facts.
for technical information, but even in there, I find it incorrect. Certainly, I found things biased. And so it's something you need to be really understanding. One problem is that kids and like 20 something year olds really grew up with using the web and the Wikipedia. And even though in schools, at least in America, teachers are critical of the use of Wikipedia, it's become so prevalent that people almost completely trust it. Younger people more so, um, for its truthfulness and unbiased opinion. There's a On the bottom right, you see a diagram, a pie chart that this is actually a study done specifically for, I think it was, you can click on it, issues, information related to translation, language translation. So very specific, but it talks about reliability because the Wikipedia covers everything. There haven't been any inclusive studies looking at the issue of reliability and veracity, but there's been a few targeted studies like this one. So again, you really need to be careful about it. Little up in the right hand, you can see some people are very strict, saying Wikipedia should not be used in a scholarly research paper, um, and that it's us, and that is a big issue, that it's not biased. I've seen it being included a little more, not necessarily as a primary source, but maybe as a place to get started. Um, it certainly shouldn't be your only source. So there's a little joke on the bottom left if you want to pause and read it.
So at the same time that
So
the web is a
when
new
we're
technology, it
evaluating
certainly
information
allows
and
for
we're
the
thinking
creation
about that, one
and
aspect is
dissemination
who's
of
judging
information
this
more easily.
information.
The
And there's
issues
this
of
concept that's
reliability
in some
sources and
sense
things like
new
wisdom of the
in
crowd,
its
and
actual
understanding how rating systems could be
real
potentially used
common
to
usage
manipulate have been
is the
true for
wisdom of the
printed
crowd that we
media too,
just talked about.
not just the web.
Of course, the
What might
problems
be said
with
for the
this
web is
is
it
that
maybe makes it
uh,
easier
crowd's not necessarily
to
the best
hide
purveyor
information,
of
to
judgment,
alter
okay?
things.
Um,
One
and
thing that might be true
some
also
small
compared to
group may
printed media
decide something
is
that gets
that
magnified into a larger group of people,
you might have less
even
educated or
though
different
maybe
varied
the
people viewing
decision or the information that they
through
decided
search engines and other ways,
upon
where
is incorrect.
with printed media
Rating systems
you
can
really
be
have to
easy to
physically kind
manipulate.
of look for it.
People talk
And
about
so that
how
really leads to the concept of
certainly sites try
responsibility. The site
to
operators,
prevent
they should
owners
identify
of,
supply
let's
content,
say, restaurants
try to make
getting
clear
high,
who the source
making the
is,
reviews,
and
inflating them,
if
but
information has
this
been
happens all the
verified.
time. Another kind of issue is the fact that there are vulnerable viewers that they have their own kind of sets of judgment that might be uh, infantile, so to speak, or immature simply because of their age. And this includes, children, but also less maybe educated individuals, and there can be whole ranges of that. And so the effect of um, information and misinformation or veracity of information for them is even greater than for adults who don't fall into that category. So, what are the responsibilities of site owners like, let's say, Yelp? They should definitely identify user supplied content, make it clear which information has been verified or not. Like, for example, Amazon will have reviews and they'll be certified as a customer who actually purchased the product. Uh, these two things actually is kind of the problem that a lot of people have with Wikipedia. A lot of people don't realize that it is group sourced, And it isn't at all clear if anyone with any kind of an expert level has done any kind of verification of the information. One special issue is that of media on the web, videos, images, manipulation of those kind of for various purposes. Sometimes it's unintentional, sometimes it's direct deception and fraud. And I guess some of the questions concerning this particular issue is, should agencies have the ability now with, it's pretty easy to use using Photoshop and other kinds of video and photo editing. So
when we think about computers and
one thing
think about
related
the
to
web,
Wikipedia is this
in
idea
relation
of,
to skills like writing, thinking, and deciding,
is
has
it
the
okay,
easy access to a lot of information
for example,
replaced
have computers,
the
technology, web
need to
tools
develop those
displace
skills? It's an
skills that
intriguing
were
question.
important? Can you, for
So
example,
is it
write a
okay
paper
for a student
by
to mash
piecing things
other
together
people's
from
thoughts?
different people?
Would
In
think
some
about
sense,
taken,
that's what
copied
Wikipedia is.
from the web?
It's authored
Is
by
that
different
a
people
new
together, but we're
way
really
of
talking here about like a
formulating
student,
information that's
like the little
acceptable?
picture, the
How
top
about
picture
abdicating
shows, copying
responsibility?
from another student, from another student,
People
from another
willing more
student,
and
and
more
then
to
kind of
let computers do their
thinking
thinking
that
for
that
them,
is
make
original
decisions
work.
for them?
It's a
Reliance on
slippery
computers
slope.
systems over human
I'm
judgment
glad to
can
say that
become
a lot of K through 12, K
Fear
through
of
8
having to
teachers,
defend your
maybe
own
more
judgment if
specifically,
something goes wrong, relying
spend
instead on
some time talking
other
about it.
expressed
I think the
opinions
problem is
or
it's so
found
easy to
thoughts.
copy for students that they don't even have an understanding that what they're doing necessarily is wrong. And so it becomes important as a society to kind of really say that no, it is important to create original things, and that you should be very, very clear about copying. You should have quotes, you should have references, and it should really be minimal. So, leading up to the next talk is the idea of, you know, are we letting technology replace humans in thought? And in some cases, the answer is actually yes. What happens when there's a reliance on computer systems over human judgment? And even getting to the point, like the lower image shows, that you might not trust your own judgment after some point in time using technology so much. There's an interesting thing. There's some apps that let you try things on in dressing rooms and get kind of crowd opinions about whether or not you should purchase something. And while that's not exactly the computer, it's using computer to have other kind of people, in a sense, remote people in the virtual world, to make decisions for you. So a few kind of funny images kind of talking about the negative. The upper one is about doctors, and I've actually experienced this myself, where you go in and see a doctor and they're not even looking at you. They're just typing in symptoms and then coming back with some kind of database result. And it is crazy. There's a reason why this cartoon has been made.
So with this
So
idea of
what is a
allowing
computer model?
the concept of
Generically,
allowing
it's a
computers to
program
think
or
for us,
system that
we
either
talked
autonomously or
sometimes about
simultaneously models a
computer frameworks.
situation
And
and
I'm going
may
to
or may
define
not make a
this loosely
decision
as
based on the
programs or
information, the
systems that
results.
autonomously or
So there's
semi-autonomously
modeling in many
model
fields.
a situation,
Medicine,
possibly
you're
make
seeing a picture
decisions,
in the
and
lower
present
right.
results,
So
conclusions.
finding tumors, finding cancer, doing different kinds of diagnostic analysis and tests. These are all computerized today. Modeling for everything from structural to weather to AI, right? Decision, speech, pretty much every field, self-driving cars, right? That you can think of has computer models as part of it, actively deployed, not alone, let alone research going on into increased computer
The
modeling.
problem with
So
computer
what's the
models
problem? This is
are a
a,
number of things.
a
First of
quote
all,
here
how well did the
by
people who created this system
Bertrand Russell, who was
understand the
a
underlying
philosopher,
science or theory of the
and it
problem
says, most of the greatest
that they're
evils
trying
that man has
to solve?
inflicted upon man
Models
have
usually
come
involve some
through
kind of
people
assumptions or
feeling quite certain
simplifications of
about
reality,
something which in
and
fact
in
was
doing
false.
so, they may not
So
produce accurate
that's something to
results.
think about, and
And how
what
closely
it
do the
means
results
basically in terms of
correspond to results
the
from
topic we're
real
talking about
experience,
is
or
that
maybe even the
these
human experience?
models involve assumptions, or simplicities, simplistic type uh, reductions of the problem. And they're not going to be absolutely correct. They're going to have failures. They are designed by people, and they can be very biased in how they attack or consider what is important about a problem. So these are imperfect. And I guess the questions, some of the questions is, are these better than human decision making? So a little example has to do with car crash analysis. So when auto manufacturers are designing cars, one of the things that they will do is, of course, do car crash analysis for structural design. It uses something called finite element method. It basically, as you can see here with the picture, imposes a grid on the frame of the car. It divides it into a small set of pieces, which are basically like elements, hence finite element. And then based on mechanics and physics, uh, in forces, it will look at the results of different forces, different impacts in different locations of the car. And so it can cost a lot of money, of course, to set these things up. Um, it in, it uh, will help to discover different kinds of defects, but how good are the programs? How well is the physics really understood? Um, what simplifications do the programs make? And how are they actually? How does it actually compare? Um, so in essence, right now, more than let's say 10 years ago or 5 years ago, car analysis programs do actually a pretty good job, and they can be used to help design safer cars and
So to
save lives.
reiterate, some of the
But they're
issues
not
with why
exact, and
computer models
so
may not
that's
be
something you
accurate
have
can
to
include
always
not having a
consider
complete understanding of the
um,
system we're modeling, the data
in the use of computer modeling. Especially true when safety is an issue or in the medical field. So issues of self-driving cars, things like systems that diagnose cancer, for example, are important. That's why a lot of times, at least in the medical field specifically, you'll find technologies are more assistive than replacing humans in loops. So they'll assist the doctor or the radiologist in detecting. As you know, in our lecture series, we have a set of questions for each lecture, so you can pause and answer these on the discussion board on Blackboard. So computers and community, and basically
computers and technology and
humans
community.
like
There's a number of
to
ways.
connect with other humans that have
I guess first
common
of all, let's
interests and
think about
beliefs.
what's
And,
usually involved in
in the
community.
past, we had things like telephones,
So
and
for
now with
we
the
have
advent of the
groups
computer and
and
especially
humans
the
typically,
internet, it becomes much
base groups
easier to
based on
connect these
common
people.
or shared interests and
However, for every
feelings.
positive, there's
Some
a
ear
negative.
early
And
technologies like
so
telephones
over the years since the
basically
web, there's been a
make
decline in community involvement,
communications
memberships in clubs and
dehumanized, and it's
organizations.
also
So it is an issue. But as some of you have experienced with Meetup and stuff, the internet can actually also bring people
one
back
thing that
physically
is
together
true
too.
is that the
So one
computer
of the great things is
technology
it
and the
helps
web and
connect
internet
people
in
from all
particular
over
has
the
brought
world.
been able to bring people
Email and
together
internet
from all over
provide
the world, something that
very convenient and cheap ways for
wasn't
family and friends
really
to stay in
accessible even
contact.
with
It can
telephone
be
as
a
much as
great
it is
way to spread
Now, email and
news.
internet are either
Social
cheap or
networking
free in
sites
some
such as
cases,
Facebook, Twitter,
way for
Instagram
people.
reach people quickly. But with every positive, there's a negative. There's been studies that have shown a shift in our sense of community. Some people have a distorted sense of reality. They feel their online community is more real than the real world, and they kind of disconnect from society. So again, if you would like to pause and answer these questions at this moment, please do so. So the digital divide, talking about those who have it and those who don't. The digital divide is the idea that not everyone has access to technology or equal access. New technologies generally are only available to more wealthier people. However, the time it takes for these new technologies to make its way into the common use is decreasing. Cost is not only a factor, but the ease of use in technologies that are getting easier to use, more mobile, also plays a role. Entrepreneurialism, providing low-cost solutions, so competition, and even governments get involved with funding technologies, like funding technologies in schools, for example. So there's this notion now that, well, through computers, people are using the web, approximately 1 billion people, and maybe 5 billion do not, through the use of computers and the web. So this digital divide, trying to bridge this gap. There's been a lot of nonprofit organizations and governments involved in trying to do that in different ways. One of the things, so here's an example in 2013, you can see kind of the division of out of 100 people, how many actually use the internet. And you can see actually in England and in Norway, Sweden, and Finland, these are the countries that actually is the most, followed by United States, Australia, and some of Western Europe. And then it kind of goes down from there. The worst being mostly in Africa and a few of the Asian countries. And this is what we're talking about with the digital divide. So whether this is 2013 or obviously we're much past this point, but this kind of distribution, the exact numbers of it, still exists today. So there are lots of different organizations. One Laptop Per Child, for example, looks at trying to design inexpensive laptops for elementary schools in developing countries. But what I'll say to you is the mobile phone has been one of the greatest kind of success stories in terms of bridging the digital divide. You can get mobile phones for $50, some of the Android phones, and that's a price point where even in poorer countries it's possible. There's even cheaper phones than that, than 50. How well they function is another issue. You get too low. But here you can see a picture. Here's another one. This is actually in Indonesia. And it's, the use of mobile devices now has made access to the web much greater than before. This is a 2017 chart. And what's interesting about this is that you can see in these Asian countries here, like India and Indonesia, they use mobile phones as their device that they use to connect to the internet. Not as much, interestingly, in other countries as their primary device, their only device. I should say only, not primary. So there are some 12% of people in the United States only use their phone. That's their only device they use, mobile devices, to access the internet. They don't use the computer anymore. But in other places where maybe money is an issue, it's much, much higher. So criticisms and praises of technology and
So there are
opposing
different
views.
viewpoints when it comes
So
to the
certainly there's a
impact
lot
of
of criticisms.
computers
We've heard
and
some of this
technology
in
on
previous
society,
lectures,
and there is a
like on
view called the
employment, that
Neo-Luddite
there is an
view
inequity,
of
that
computers and
really it's kind of
technology, and it's
destroying
really a
our
movement of opposition
essence of
to general or
humanness.
specific technology
Um,
advances.
it's a
It includes
disintegration
some
of
concepts
society
and ideas. So there are different viewpoints when it comes
that
to
it
the
really only
impact of
benefits big
computers
business and
and
government.
technology
It
on
doesn't solve real
society, and there
problems.
is a view
Uh,
called the
it's
Neo-Luddite view
also a problem
of
in certain
computers and
environments like
technology, and
school
it's
where
really a movement
children
of
aren't
opposition
able to
to general or
focus.
specific
So
technology
there's a lot
advances.
of negatives.
It
Some of
includes
these things I
some
completely agree with. You may
concepts
or
and
may not
ideas that
too.
computers
And
cause
other
massive
things,
unemployment.
I don't
There's no
really
real
agree
need
that it
for
only
these
benefits big business and
technologies.
government.
They
It
cause
may,
social inequity.
but I do think there's a lot of accomplishments of technology. I wouldn't be in technology if I didn't feel that way. Um, so a really interesting thing is farming. You don't necessarily think about technology in farming right away, but it's really helped worldwide to bring down the prices of food because more crops are able to be grown. Um, there's less damage or waste in the sense of the crops. Sometimes people are really upset about it, like genetically modified GMO type food, trying to make bigger animals or, longer shelf life and what the impact of that is on the environment is definitely an issue people talk about. But I don't think you can deny that food supplies have actually gone up in general. Impact on life expectancy, that's gone up in general. Assistive technologies benefit people with disabilities. So, a lot of accomplishments. Here's a few I'd like you to pause and read through, including the life expectancy, including the kind of eradication, I wouldn't say elimination, but the reduction of a number of common diseases worldwide, how much you spend on food versus how much you might have spent in the past. So companies will tell you their technology is always good. Here's a few little images to kind of think about that. Um, Different viewpoints. So there's this term called a Luddite. Luddite actually historically comes from a term related to a political movement during the Industrial Revolution that was against some of the new industrial tools and techniques that were forming. Neo-Luddite is a term that's used more today. Neo meaning new, is a person who opposes many forms of modern technology. And of course, the other type is a non-Luddite. Okay, so that describes any person, and they can have a variety of viewpoints, but they're not self-described as a neo-Luddite. In fact, you may agree with some of the opinions of a neo-Luddite, but maybe not collectively most of them. So what is the purpose of technology? Just to get a kind of difference in viewpoint here, a neo-Luddite might answer it's to eliminate jobs to reduce the cost of production, where a non-Luddite, it's to reduce effort needed to produce goods and services. So there's a different viewpoint here. Both statements might be saying kind of the same thing in terms of what is happening, but the first kind of suggests the focus is on employment. It's only for the benefit of the company, whereas the second one talks about, reduction in effort and, needed to actually create something. So take a moment and pause, some little fun pictures. So a Luddite might think a laptop is like your paper and pencil. And then, the funny thing about people who declare themselves Luddites is they're producing information maybe on the web, right? Which is technology. So, and this concept, like I said, Luddite comes from the Industrial Revolution time, but always this fear of new inventions and what they might do has existed. So Neo-Luddites, kind of one of the fundamental ideas behind their philosophy is that technology doesn't really make important improvements in life. Um, and it's this kind of human versus nature dichotomy, this split, um, that that it's important to be human, to be natural. So some examples of some Neo-Luddites here and some of their beliefs. So Kirkpatrick Sales, he has a list of benefits, which he talks about technology provides speed, ease, and mass access. But he says he dislikes all of these. He says that although an individual might feel their lives are better because of computers, the perceived benefits are industrial virtues that may not be virtues in another morality. So, Jerry Mander, another neo-Luddite, points out that thousands of generations of humans got along without computers, suggesting we could do so too. One thing that you'll see sometimes is this kind of, certainly bias, right, obviously, but this kind of one-sided type information. So critics might point out their weaknesses, but often ignore the weaknesses of alternatives, right? So just not using technology might, whatever you're doing instead, like a human-based decision, might have a lot of weaknesses to it too. So does technology create a need for itself? So capitalism, people who criticize capitalism often say that there's a lot of products that we don't need. If you look at all the apps on the App Store, like, do you really need most of them? The answer would probably be, for most people, no. And a Luddite or a Neo-Luddite would argue that, this is definitely true, that technology causes the productions of things that we don't need. And they believe that it causes more pressure on the individual to do buying, and that that is a real negative impact on society. As we saw in that particular fun cartoon a few slides ago, the funny thing, of course, is that anti-technology groups, environmentalist groups, use computers and the web really to disseminate information, which is a little bit of a hypocrisy. All right. So to create or not, making decisions about the development of new technologies. So one of the problem is that you really don't know how new technologies will be used and their effect. Each new technology finds new and unexpected uses. So if we look at, drones and how they're being used in the military, how they want to be used for delivering goods, these were not the initial intended uses of this technology. And each technology, that's true. So also, technology is full of, really wrong predictions. And so this is something that you have to be careful about. But at the same time, you'll see people who will argue against a certain technology and they're wrong, right? So here's a little example, intelligent machines and super intelligent humans, or the end of the human race. Just a little kind of funny title here. But the idea, there's something called a technological singularity. It's a point at which artificial intelligence or some combined human-machine intelligence advances so far that we cannot comprehend what lies on the other side. We cannot prepare for the aftermath, but prepare for more gradual developments. So that's like the Terminator movies, right, where the machines take over. So this is a kind of an issue, like an ethical issue. Like, you don't know the gradual use, the eventual use, the gradual effect of a technology. So again, pause, and here are some discussion questions. So to leave you with a few thoughts about controlling technology and what might you do. One thing is to maybe limit the scope of decisions about the development of new technology to better make decisions, to decentralize decision making and make it non-coercive, to reduce the impacts of mistakes, avoid manipulation by companies who fear competition, and prevent violations of liberty. So it's a difficult topic. There isn't a clear solution, and as we can see from the history of the world, I think it's going to be a question that will continue and that we will debate, and that there won't be a right or a wrong answer, that it'll just be an evolution of answers.